Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another story mix. Today, I got some more overdose reports for you guys. Some very close call ones that were life threatening and very dangerous. And to say the least, some of these people are lucky to be alive. Not every single report is on the edge like this, but most reports here are. But you guys like the last batch of overdose reports, so I'm sure you'll enjoy this one. So without further ado, let's dive right into this. Two grams of DPH. I went to hell and back to be able to tell you this. 2 grams. Don't do it. Unless you want to end up in the hospital while being threatened by your inner demons and feeling almost unbearable pain in your chest, thinking you could die any second. Still dealing with minor weakness, but it probably won't go away for a while. July 12th. After around 20 minutes of consuming the pills, I started to see mild distortions and audio hallucinations, mostly ticking and scratching, which seemed distant. I was inside the car which was going to the house I was supposed to spend my trip at, and I kept telling Martin, my friend, not to interfere with the trip in any way, unless it's obvious I'm in danger. I noticed my memory span was becoming short, and the tickling and scratching was getting louder, along with a mild head rush-like, high-pitched sound. Right before we reached this place, I realized I couldn't move and my vision started glitching up. It kept flashing and freezing, and sometimes I wouldn't see anything at all for a split second. I told this to Martin, and he convinced me I could walk. I just had to do it carefully. So I followed him to the house. I was very, very heavy, and every time I looked at the floor, it was like my feet were sinking into it. I was left alone in the room, which was slowly melting, and most of the furniture had bright, unusual outlines. At this point, I felt crawling all over me. Vision flashed again, and I found myself completely covered in spider webs. Moving my hands through them helped for a little while. Hands would go through them, and they'd fade, but the webs came back almost immediately. I could feel the sticky sensation on my skin, which made them seem just as real as I was. Then, there was a loud knock at the window. I turned around to see someone standing behind it, so I opened it. I heard music coming from outside. It was different from what I heard during my last trip, but strangely familiar and similar to it. "Let's go, Cedric," said the creature, and I climbed out the window without much consideration. It was extremely hard to walk. The grass and the trees seemed grainy, and it looked like they were moving, crawling, breathing, and living. My sense of time was severely distorted. Some steps would feel like an eternity, or I would black out and confuse very long periods of time for a second. We were going towards the music, the creature walking a few steps ahead of me. After a while, I started noticing lights, probably torches, among trees, and hundreds of moths around them. The air was full of moths, and they would land on me and fly around. I tried my best to keep them out of my face, failing miserably. Finally, we reached a clearing. There were many people there. At the front, very still, stood my relatives, all dressed in black, surrounded by shadows and people I don't know. They all seemed frozen and had the same blank expression on their faces, with their eyes fixed on me. I tried to talk, but my voice got stuck in my throat. It was extremely sore and dry. I started feeling a mixture of guilt and fear, because I could tell they all knew the creature took me here because of DPH, and considering most of them were dead, I wasn't sure if I was still alive. Suddenly, there was a very unpleasant crackling sound and a white flash. The creature who took me here was gone now, and everyone was just walking around and talking, completely ignoring me. I decided to sit because of the heaviness. After a while, I noticed with the corner of my eye a black dot moving through the grass towards me very quickly. Then I would feel a budge moving under my shirt at the right shoulder. I freaked out and smacked it, and a black rat fell out of my sleeve. It looked dead, but every time I took my attention off it, it would disappear and run/hide under my shirt again. I was really scared of it for some reason, and after around 5 loops of this, I started beating it repeatedly after it dropped out of my sleeve, until the rat's body turned to some sort of rubber goo. Its legs were still moving. After this, it wouldn't touch me again, but I kept seeing its distorted body with the trembling legs from time to time. I quickly stood up and went to a different spot. I was approached by my mother. She was crying. "Why did you do this, Cedric? We warned you." I told her not to worry and that I was going to be fine. Bullshit. Other people froze again, and I can hear voices saying, "We warned you," and "What have you done?" even though their lips weren't moving. The longer I looked at them, the more distorted they would get until they had bug eyes and arms reaching the ground. Another flash followed. I was back at the front yard of the house and saw Martin standing by me. I assumed he shook me. He asked if I was alright and said that I'd been standing there for ages. He had spiders in his hair. I tried to say yes, but I couldn't because my mouth was painfully dry. I walked my way to the house. Martin told me I never went there in the first place. The whole trip thus far has been experienced right after getting out of the car, with just standing/moving around at that spot. There are many blackouts at this point. I recall centipedes from my last trip, and spiders all over me and inside me. Around 10 of them crawled out of my mouth. July 13th. I woke up, still tripping hard. Never remembered falling asleep. I went to check the next room. Martin told me I was out for around 5 hours. Later I found out he was still asleep, and the information was false. I managed to get some water and go to the bathroom because the urge to pee was terrible. Moving was still a difficult task, and I couldn't concentrate properly. This is when I posted "alive" with 2 A's. When I got back to the living room, I saw someone sitting on the couch. It stood up, and I recognized the figure to be Hatman. He walked towards me and said, "You are getting in and running out." I started feeling extremely hazy and got another head rush. I'm not sure if I left the sofa or blacked out and lay down on it, but I was there at the edge of sleep, and the Hatman was looking right at me. This might be a dream or a full-blown trip. I don't remember closing my eyes, and I could still feel my surroundings. I was in an extremely vast room. The floor, ceiling, and walls were black. There were no doors, and I couldn't see where it ended because darkness hid it out of sight. There was a woman standing right in front of me. She looked at me, smiled, and took her face off as if it was a mask. The face behind it looked exactly the same, but she was bleeding from her eyes, mouth, and nose, and her eyes were completely black. I looked around the room to see faces appearing on the walls and ceiling, greeting me without words, until they started to fall down like masks too, revealing bruised and blood-covered faces. The mask would turn into ash that wouldn't settle, but move around on the floor and by my feet. That's all I can remember from this stage of the trip. After snapping out of this, I lay there for a while, feeling my heart beat rapidly. The Hatman was gone. My hallucinations were mostly audio now. I heard lots of incomprehensible whispers and quiet singing. I posted on this thread again and decided to go to sleep for real. I was so very tired. This time, I drifted into deep, deep sleep. After a while, I realized I was sleeping. My vision was completely black until a room began to appear. It was small and gray, its door open, displaying nothingness. I walked towards the door and stepped out of the room. Several shadows approached me. The door shut, and I heard, "You are out," very clearly. Then I felt a burning pain on my chest. Martin said I started screaming. He tried to wake me up and check my pulse, then realized what was happening and called an ambulance. I had to down a lot of charcoal. Minor hallucinations for around 3 days. Fuck. Accidental Nick OD. Hope you enjoy. Preface. This is more of a short story to show that even mild drugs can deliver very adverse effects, and all substances should be respected. This is my first report, so excuse it for probably being a little shitty and short. What happened? I was with a few friends, and we were heading over to my friend's apartment to buy some pills. At the time, I didn't have my standard nicotine device. I almost solely use e-nic instead of cigarettes unless I don't have another option or I'm tripping. But we drove over to my buddy's apartment and parked, and walked over to my friend, who was chilling outside, ripping his new mod that he had gotten. I gave him the money, and he gave me the pills I purchased. As we were leaving back to the car, I asked to hit his nicotine, since I hadn't had it in a while, and love a buzz anytime I can get one. My friend hands me his device and said, "Be careful, it has 50 Nic e-liquid, meaning it's pretty strong." Now, this is usually what I use, but in a device that doesn't have nearly as many watts. The problem was, 50 Nic isn't supposed to go into a mod that has so many watts because it can be bad. And although I never thought much of it, I realized why you aren't supposed to now. Well, I took 2 big rips off this, and I immediately felt a very extreme buzz. Feeling satisfied, I started to walk away. As I did, I started to have tunnel vision, and I felt very weird, but I thought it was just the intense buzz. I took a few more steps and started to feel like I was going to pass out and like I couldn't hold myself up. I ended up starting to fall over on a car, and after that, I went unconscious. The next thing I remember is looking up at my friend who was standing over me, screaming my name, and me having my arms above my head, shaking uncontrollably. As I started to come to more, I remember saying, I'm good," and was able to regain control of my arms. Although it felt difficult, I forced my arms to stop. The friend who was standing over me held me up, and although I was very weak, I was able to stand as she told me what just happened. I had experienced a seizure that had me on the ground convulsing and fully unconscious. Luckily, it stopped as soon as it started, and I was able to make a recovery, although I never sought treatment since, and now I worry that I may have damaged myself in a permanent way. I still use nicotine, which means I probably didn't learn my lesson, but nonetheless, it was a terrifying experience that also hurt the mental image of myself and my mental health. Anyways, thank you all for listening. Reckless and lucky. Before I get into what happened, I just want to say I know this was stupid, and I'm surprised I lived through this, but I just didn't care at the time of the trip. I'm an ex-poly addict at this point, and have a lot of prior substance abuse experience. I had a couple of sole opioid overdoses, and a few overdoses with mixed substances. At the time of the trip, I had a prescription for the focal one. I worked overnight at a supermarket. I had bought DPH as generic sleep aids and DXM in the form of 5-ounce Delsum the day before after getting off of work. It was about 8 a.m. when I drank a whole bottle of Delsum, which I figured out to come out to about 850 milligrams. I took around 600 to 700 milligrams of Benadryl and enjoyed my trip before going to sleep. It was just a normal DPH/DXM trip. Music was amazing. Saw some bugs on the wall. Heard voices. I woke up at around 6 p.m. and I had to go to work at 11 p.m. that night. I normally would never do this, but I think I was super dissociated and just said fuck it and downed another bottle of Delsum. Everything felt really zoomed out, and I tried my hardest to walk normally so people wouldn't suspect that I'm on something. Music was really good, and I couldn't really feel my body at all. Like I was numb without the euphoria on a high dose of opiates. I was just chilling at my PC, listening to music and watching YouTube while tripping for a couple hours until it came time for work. I crushed out 2 10-milligram Focalin in between some spoons and snorted it before I got in the shower. Everything was really zoomed out in the shower, but I had so much energy. It felt like my body was surging with electricity kind of, and I just wanted to move and jump around, but everything was still numb feeling, so I had a hard time doing this. My mood changed too, and I felt the happiest I'd ever been. Very talkative and sociable, which is the complete opposite of how I am normally. Before I left my house, I took a 10-milligram Focalin orally and 500 milligrams of DPH. This is probably one of, if not the dumbest thing I've ever done, because I was still learning how to drive, and I drove my mom's car to work with her in the passenger seat. I was really dissociated, but I tried very hard to keep my cool. I didn't really have many visual hallucinations, but I did have a lot of auditory ones. I kept hearing my girlfriend's voice, my mom's voice, my grandpa's voice, random music. Sometimes my ears would ring. I even heard the gun sounds from CSGO and Rust occasionally. It was very hard to focus on the road. I kept on speeding up way past the speed limit and running stop signs. And I remember my mom bitching at me, but I just didn't care because I was so out of it. Eventually I got to work. It was very hard to walk, but I think I managed to look sober because I didn't get any weird looks or anything. Eventually I got the things I needed to stock on a U-boat and proceeded to the aisle. I had earbuds in and music sounded fucking amazing, but I kept hearing people's voices, so I got distracted. But I eventually learned to ignore them. The floors and walls would move, but I would try not to stare for too long because I thought I'd get in trouble for not doing anything. I had to match the numbers on the product to the numbers on the shelf, and it was very hard to read them. I had to squint and stare at it for a good minute. Eventually, my boss called for a break, and I went into the bathroom and popped 2 10 milligram Focalin. Over the course of the next 30 minutes, my mood skyrocketed back to the feeling I had before. I was really happy, and I had a lot of energy, but my body was numb and everything felt distant. I kept repeating things to myself in my head, and they weren't thought loops. It was like I had a lot of energy, and I just liked to say it. I remember one of the things I kept telling myself was, ride a U-boat like a skateboard, and I have no idea why. Eventually, I got all my work done in an aisle, and I moved on to the next one. I felt like Superman, and I can stack and organize the aisle super quickly. I was hallucinating noises from different games and repeating random shit in my head. Eventually, I got off of work and was able to clock out. My grandpa picked me up, but I didn't drive home because I told him I didn't feel good. Shortly after I got to my house, I felt the crash from the Focalin. It didn't really impact my mood at all. I just felt normal again, and my energy dipped very low, and I fell asleep while I was watching a movie. I was still very dissociated like before. Everything was zoomed out, and the hallucinations were majority auditory instead of visual. Next day I went to work, I snorted 10 milligrams of Focalin and took 10 milligrams orally, and I got the worst chest pain of my life and felt like my heart was going to explode after an hour and 30 minutes of stocking stuff. I don't know if it was because I took DXM and DPH the day before or because I had taken too much Focalin in a short amount of time. But I don't think that's the case because I've taken more Focalin at once before and didn't have any chest pain. Death experience. There is much debate about the toxicity of Amanita muscaria. I would like to relate my experience with the mushroom as a warning to others. I do not recommend Amanitas. In fact, I recommend staying as far away from them as you can. I had with me an ounce of Amanita muscaria mushrooms. They were red capped with small white spots on the top. I had not taken anything or any substances, including alcohol, for over several weeks at the time I decided to experiment with the mushrooms. I was alone in my home in my apartment that day and bored. I consumed a large amanita, approximately 2 inches diameter cap, with several smaller ones and some stems that weighed out to be 1/8 of an ounce. I then sat down and waited for the mushroom to have the anticipated effect. I waited a full hour and nothing happened. I believe now that perhaps the mushrooms were already slightly affecting my judgment at the time, and I was unaware of it. At any rate, I believe myself to be disappointingly unaffected. I believe that perhaps the amanita mushrooms were not going to affect me in any way. Just to check and see if this was correct, I then proceeded to consume the rest of the mushrooms. This was approximately a few more smaller stems with red cap stems measuring approximately 1 to 2 inches in diameter, and a larger full-size mushroom cap of approximately 12 inches in diameter. Counting the 1/8 ounce of mushrooms I had consumed an hour earlier, along with the ones I continued to consume, I ate a total of 1 full ounce of Amanita muscaria mushrooms. I had never eaten Amanita muscaria before, and I am a female of 100 pounds. The 12-inch mushroom cap tasted unbearably horrible. I don't even remember how I forced the mushroom down my throat, except for the fact that I do not like to leave that which I've started unfinished. After about 5 minutes of this last consumption of the amanitas,
I could feel the mushrooms taking effect. My head was light suddenly, and immediately afterward, the room began to spin. I could barely see anything. I have experienced many other substances before, and I knew that I was ODing. I am not sure how, because I couldn't see very well, but I ran out of my apartment 5 blocks down to where my apartment clubhouse and office was located. I knew that I had to be around people because I wasn't going to be okay. I made it to the clubhouse, but barely. By the time I got there, I couldn't see anything. All I could comprehend was the feeling of dizziness, or rather, spinning sensations. I had no notion of whether I was sitting or standing. I have never been so unaware of my surroundings from any substance before. All I could comprehend was this spinning sensation. It was not merely a sensation, but I was spinning. It went faster and faster, the spinning becoming more and more complicated, and I couldn't stop it. It was faster than anything I have ever experienced before. It was my body and soul spinning faster than the speed of light. This doesn't sound that horrific, but it was not something one can easily comprehend. The spinning continued to increase in its complicatedness, and I could see that it was the spinning of the universe. It was like the way of life is put together, and I was comprehending it. It was just blowing my mind, and the spinning just became faster and faster, and it was spinning me in an even bigger circle of all the spins. And then there came a time when the spinning of the spinning of the spins was at the end of the spinning loop and about to spin even faster. For some reason, I knew I had to make a choice. I could choose to give in to the spinning, or I could choose the harder choice. I didn't know what the harder choice was, but I knew it would be hard. I almost chose the spinning, but for some reason, I didn't. I chose the harder choice, which I didn't understand. Then I was in a void. It wasn't even black, for colors, thoughts, emotions, and feelings didn't exist. It was totally and completely void. I was terrified, but it wasn't a feeling. It was more like my soul was terrified. The closest way to describe the void is the color black. You don't even know how many sensations you are actually experiencing every moment until they are all taken away from you at once. All of them. This experience I fought with choosing the hard way. The harder I fought, the easier it became. As I fought, don't ask what I was fighting, I don't know. I could hear sounds of people's voices. They were getting louder. It was as if I was coming out of a tunnel or a fog, as if they or I was coming from a distance. It was not only the sounds of people's voices, but the sounds of me returning to the world. The next thing I knew, I was woken up in a hospital bed. I had IVs all over my body. This is what I found out. 1. I was just inside the apartment clubhouse when my apartment landlord discovered me unconscious and unresponsive. She called 911 after unsuccessfully trying to revive me. When the ambulance and hospital people got to me, I was defecating on myself. I was told that your body expels all of its waste before you die, which is why this was happening to me when they found me. 3. By the time they got me to the hospital, I was clinically dead. My heart had stopped. 4. I had been in the hospital 3 days and 2 nights before I woke up. 5. The nurses and doctors and examiners told me I had a seizure but could not determine any cause of such. To this day, I do not know if I actually had a seizure during or after my experience or not at all. I believe I may have, but did not tell the hospital or any of its employees that I had eaten the Amanita muscaria. 6. The doctors told me that for some time I was in a coma. They would not have been surprised if I did not come out of the coma, ever. For some reason, I know that if I had made the other choice to keep spinning faster and faster out of control, I would have been in a coma and then eventually the black void, death. 7. I was scheduled for an MRI but was given a different test instead. I can't remember what it's called, but they proceeded to apply glue to various parts of my head and hair to test my brain by way of some device with elaborate workings. They found nothing. Being a first time Amanita muscaria user and lightweight female, consumption of an ounce was not the wisest course of action. I am not one for submitting reports or telling others my experiences, but I felt compelled to do so this once concerning relevant experience. I was clinically dead and most likely should have died from my usage of Amanita muscaria. If I had not been found dead at that moment and rushed to the hospital, I would be dead today. I consider myself lucky to be alive to tell this story. If I had died, I wouldn't be able to warn others about this toxic mushroom. It can and will cause death if abused. I know, and anyone to think otherwise, be warned. Personally, I would stay away from Amanita muscaria. There are plenty of other, safer substances out which can give one the experience you're looking for. It's not worth the risk. Nothing is worth your life. I now know that. Over-the-counter binge or suicide attempt. I am writing to relate an experience we had with our son. This is hopefully a cautionary tale for some of you out there who may get the same ideas, and it may also provide a little insight into what the families of substance abusers go through. I'm not going to get preachy though, so don't worry. I will just stick to the facts. I am a registered nurse who works at a local hospital. My job takes me all over the hospital, so I get to know the staff of all the units rather well. Our middle son started drinking and huffing around age 11, per his recollection. He has said that he never used hard drugs like coke, heroin, crack, etc. He has pretty much stuck to over-the-counter drugs like Coricidin, Robotripping, Robitussin, huffing anything he could get his hands on, including ether. We keep a can handy to start the tractor on cold mornings. Of course, alcohol is his favorite, and he did a lot of mixing booze with the drugs. This led to criminal activity, petty stuff like breaking into neighbors' houses to steal their booze. He broke into his school when he was high and did some damage. Long story short, he's been in and out of juvenile detention, rehab, jail. We've been on this roller coaster with him, and it has broken and rebroken our hearts. I wish I'd known more. I wonder, over and over and over again, what more we could have done to help him. A younger friend of mine directed me here to Irwood, and thus began my education. The incident I wish to relate to you happened while my son was in a work release program. He had been going to the library, researching drugs. As it turns out, he was actually looking up ways that he could get high and still clear urine specimens to his probation officer. Coricidin was it. Now the incident in question has been disputed as to whether it was a true overdose or a suicide attempt. He has changed his story on that one. I was at work and got a call from the ER doc asking me if my son had a seizure disorder. Apparently, he was standing outside the library and was observed to have fallen and begun seizing. A bystander called 911 and was brought to my hospital. I rushed downstairs just as they were wheeling him into CAT scan due to him having hit his head on the sidewalk. I told the doc to do a tox screen, but it revealed nothing. The doc asked if he had ever done cocaine, and I said not to my knowledge, but he can never afford that. It must be something over the counter. His pulse and blood pressure were through the roof, which is why a stimulant was suspected. All they could do was throw fluids into him and keep him monitored and repeat labs. He was in the ICU for a full 48 hours. He had hallucinations whereby he'd be reaching out to grab something in the air in front of his face. He would be tripping like that and then look over at me and start crying and saying how sorry he was, and then he kept saying, "I can't believe I wanted to die. Mom, I took 80 pills." Because of these statements, I did 302 him to the behavioral health, but he was not observed there and managed to slit his wrist and was put back into the ICU. He was despondent for weeks after that. The psychiatrist said he cannot give us a diagnosis, therefore the medication was a hit or miss. The usual antidepressant, anti-anxiety, ADHD med. He said that because our son had been using since the age 11, the substance abuse disorder clouded whatever psychological diagnosis could be made. Altering the brain chemistry during such an important developmental period, blah blah blah, couldn't determine the actual specific disorder, blah blah blah. He simply told my husband and I to keep our marriage strong so our son had that stable family base, and to attend Al-Anon meetings, which we did and got some good insights from, but have not continued. Our son blew yet another chance and is now in jail again, serving 4 years this time for breaking into a house while high. He'd walked away from his program and encountering the homeowners who had a loaded gun to his head when they realized he was just a kid who was high as a kite. He did not steal a thing. He was rowing a pretend boat in their kitchen, thinking he was a pirate seeking treasure. They had every right to shoot him and did not, despite being scared out of their minds. This was Coricidin and booze. Again. I am sorry I cannot give you specific info as to how many is too many because it surely depends on body size and weight. But that is what is so problematic about this drug. Too much, seizure, coma, and death seems to be about the order of things. You do have out-of-body experiences with this drug as well. I hope this is useful info to somebody out there. All I know is after this experience, even our docs hadn't heard about this drug being abused, and they were now that much wiser. Thanks for listening. Here be dragons. I start with 2 milligrams of etazalum, as it had been a couple of days without a cigarette. 30 minutes in, I start to feel really mellow and forget completely about my desire for a smoke. 1 hour in, I try to play a game online with a friend and everything starts off alright. After maybe an hour, she's telling me that I'm just running around in circles, but I thought I was doing great. 2 hours in, she's now telling me that she can't understand what I'm saying. I'm enunciating and using real words, but they're out of order and irrelevant to what the topic of conversation is. 2 hours onward. I black out at this point, but I remember fragments. The first thing I remember is being handcuffed and bonking my head on the door of the squad car. Now I get why they push your head down. The next thing I recall is waking up in the county psych ward at 2 in the morning. I remember dosing at about 6 p.m. on Tuesday, so I figured this makes sense, but I'm terrified of this place. It's 20 cots in a room, and half the people are screaming. I have to wait 4 hours before anyone will tell me why I'm here, and I don't have my wallet or even any shoes. The doctor shows me the police report, but the first thing I notice is that the date and time on it reads 5 p.m. Wednesday, August 16th, 2017. Confused, I ask the doctor what day it is. She tells me it's Thursday and that I was apparently acting crazy all yesterday. I read further in the report, and it says I chased my roommate around the house with a knife, which is so far out of character for me that I think it's a joke. Well, it wasn't a joke. And they finally let me out at 11 p.m. Thursday, thanks to my roommates not pressing charges. When I get home, I look in the etazalum container and find that out of the 50 milligrams I started with, only 22 were left. My best guess of what happened was that I blacked out and kept redosing the whole time, and had a strange and violent reaction to it. I understand that this type of experience is probably very rare, and most likely wouldn't happen to the average person. All I can suggest is that anyone that wants to try etazalum, be very careful, and maybe have someone monitor your consumption. I learned the hard way that this kind of thing just isn't for me.
First unwilling time. I took MXC the day before yesterday, and I'm only now fully recovering from the effects of the drug. A friend brought up a bag of what she thought was ketamine at the time, and I proceeded to sniff about 80 milligrams in one line. I now know snorting isn't exactly the done thing with this stuff. My nose burnt like hell and eyes watered like mad straight away. About 10 minutes in, the film I had put on started to distort, words being elongated, overlapping sounds, and at the same time, unable to find where they're coming from. Then I experienced a shrill vibrating noise, seemed to be coming from inside my head, but all over the room at the same time. I walked into the hallway and was met with a trip
are pristine white staircases. Traveling upwards, there was a portrait of my mom at every level, and upon reaching the top, I was met with out of my eyes vision again, which freaked me out to no end, and I began to panic. Alice in Wonderland syndrome was evident, although at the time I didn't know of this and was shouting, "It's just like Alice in Wonderland in here." Small items in my kitchen, like an empty rum bottle, kept me anchored to reality temporarily, but a deep breath or a panic intake of breath would push me back out of my body again, and I felt like I saw different realms, doorways with different physics to ours, lone trees, and massive landscapes, for example. Hard to recount, but really, really eye-opening stuff. I was convinced this was the end. My head kept leaving my body and resurfacing somewhere else. I was apologizing and blubbering to God, to Satan, to stop the vibrations in my head. I was convinced my brain couldn't handle this foreign substance. Verbally, I said foreign secretaries, apparently, and that I was going to die here in my kitchen. My limbs jerked everywhere for some reason, more like a possession than the K-hole I was expecting. After about 2 hours, and my friends telling me to ride the trip out, I began to plateau to a level of control again. I found I had blood all over my arms and had scratched a massive patch of skin off my elbow, and blood was coming from my nose, which had been pissing blood since I tried to force the chemical back out during my trip. I also remember my hands were moving really slowly, but I knew I was moving them really fast. On the whole, a very real experience that I cannot wait to feel again, the synesthesia especially. I felt I could feel my sight. It sounds weird, but my vision was like running water. I would do it again, and I definitely feel its addictive quality. Oh me, OD. Intro. I've been doing nutmeg for 2 years now, once a month on average. I quit smoking pot around the same time I started this, and in a lot of ways, nutmeg has also kept me off other drugs. One of the intoxicating effects of the spice is that it's as much sickness as high. So in one not so neat 3-day package, I come out with the feeling that I never want to touch drugs again, and I don't for about a month. In this report, I aim to give an account of an average experience based on many experiences, broken down into the various stages of the process from dosage to after effects. I will also give a short account of my most recent experience, an overdose, which resulted in a visit to the emergency room. The average experience. Dosage. I'm 20 years old, male, and 200 pounds, 6'1". Typically, I purchase the store brand packaged pre-ground nutmeg in the 60-gram containers. For me, that is 2 doses. If I'm being careful, and I can only recommend that you be careful, I take out all of the powder, even out its density, i.e., crush any large lumps, etc., and then refill the container. Then I judge if it's safe to measure out the doses by volume from the side of the container. My aim is to split it in half. I've read that dosage by weight is preferable. I have underdosed and then added a little more 12 hours later, achieving a satisfying high 6 hours down the road. My other method of measuring is by taste. By now, I can tell simply from the experience how much I need, assuming I'm paying attention. This is probably an unwise method of ingesting the stuff, even if you have the experience, as the last part of this report will illustrate. Ingestion. Initially, smoking it seemed like a pleasant alternative to downing nutmeg, but after repeated experiments failing and adding a painful headache on top of it all, I decided that this is yet to be perfected. Extracting the oil into food has good effects, but is time consuming and does not in any way diminish the flavor or smell. Smoking the oil by dipping plant material into it seems to have no noticeable effect. I would not hold on to this statement too strongly, as I have only done this once. I have attempted to extract nutmeg into crystal form, but didn't get much other than some flakes, which I didn't even ingest. My single experiment was something of a failure. What is left, of course, is the simple and time-proven method of simply drinking it down. Orange juice is a favorite, but it can be done a number of ways. The powder is tightly packed and can cover a great area of my throat and internal organs relative to its small volume. In addition to this, nutmeg is extremely absorbent. When it hits my mouth or throat, it immediately coats it, and the experience is one of being sucked out of all moisture. The smell is strong, and to the uninitiated, may be unpleasant. To be honest, I'm still not used to it. The natural solution to these ingestion problems is quick gulps and plenty of liquids. Timing and preparation. It is good to keep in mind that nutmeg induces constipation and dehydration. Milk, Gatorade, water in large amounts, pre-measured portions of food so as not to overeat when the munchies march into town, and a little bit of coffee in the morning will stimulate proper hydration and bowel movement. I carry water on me and sip it throughout the day. I'm constantly urinating, so I make sure to do this outdoors or near a bathroom. Nutmeg will keep me in an altered state, ranging from tired and relaxed, slightly sedated, to utterly out of reality completely, engrossed by internal feelings on every possible subject in the universe, all at once, for a period of more than 48 hours, sometimes up to 72 hours. Hence, the best time to do it is when on vacation, on a long weekend, or at a mindless job, of course, without operating machinery of any kind, where you only need to focus on one thing at a time. The times listed here are not necessarily standard, but are my own. The high. The onset is slow, so the best time to take nutmeg is early in the morning. That way, I can catch the full panorama. The other method is to take it late at night and wake up very tired and stoned. I prefer the first method. I typically peak around 12 hours into it, can feel it strong at around 8 hours into it, should be feeling some sort of apprehension or minor effects around 5 hours into it, and should have a bump of a pre-high, high energy experience around 30 minutes to an hour into it. During and after the peak, concentration and memory will be shot to hell. During the 5 to 8 hour mark is the most mentally productive time. The mind is fertile with associations, and oftentimes I find myself writing for hours ceaselessly on any topic, fictional or not, without significant impact on memory. The 8 to 16 hour mark is a different stage of the high, where I'm most heavily dissociated from reality and can cycle in and out of dream states by will. 10 minutes in. It takes around 10 minutes to ingest 30 grams of spice. I can feel that nutmeg is more than a kitchen spice the moment it hits the membranes of my mouth. There's something intoxicating in its very smell. It may be a placebo effect, but even with the very first taste of nutmeg, I start to feel slightly altered. 30 minutes in. I start to feel happy and energetic, and highly social and talkative. 1 hour, 15 minutes in. I typically lose whatever it was that made me so social before this. Now I feel nothing except the vague feeling that I am not exactly baseline, along with whatever was bothering me before this. 4 hours in. For the past 4 hours, I have been ingesting liquids and urinating consistently. I often like to sit down and write a couple of paragraphs on some topics, just so I have something on my mind to return to later. By this time, the nutmeg burps are a common occurrence, and my eyes are starting to get a little heavy. This is a good time for a walk or something to take the edge off the anticipation. 5 hours in. My mind is a hurricane of sticky thoughts. Every thought can lead to a multiplex of other thoughts, all of them highly visual and significant, and if I can just write it all down, I would be able to unfold the mystery that is me. A quote from June 17th, 2006, at around the same time. I typically start experiencing a productive nervous tension around this time. I also tend to become completely absorbed in whatever I am writing or doing. This is the onset of the high, and so far, it doesn't come with a buzz, but the mental effects are substantial. Eyes are starting to dry. Music is more appealing in a purely sensual way. 6 hours in. Eyes are heavy, typically pink and drying. The mouth is dry. I keep hydrating, and I eat something that I have prepared. I am buzzed, and my mind is playful and active. 8 hours in. The mental trippiness that came on so playfully is by now thickly covered with a sedative feeling, but still increasing. The trip is now a slog. The sedation has been steadily increasing since 5 hours in. 10 hours in, supremely sedated, supremely high, and highly eroticized. All creative work is largely out of the window by now. I like to eat something around this time as well. I have kept hydrated throughout the whole time, and am urinating profusely. The urine is very light, but it seems to be slightly oily from the nutmeg. 12 hours in. The mind is completely gone in any normal sense. One may think that this is horrible, and that it's another sign of how pointless drugs are. I sometimes bring a tape recorder with me, lie down on a hard surface so I don't fall asleep, close my eyes, and start talking about whatever. I notice that despite the fact that I am awake, I am not really awake. I am in between the dream world and the waking world, and on top of that, I am stoned. I describe what is happening in my fantasies and memories. At the very least, I'll come up with some bizarre starting points for short stories. 16 hours, 10 minutes in. It is a good idea to fall asleep eventually. 24 hours in. I have awoken, barely. I am completely relaxed, breathe with joy, and feel completely sedated. This is like Vicodin, but over the counter. My mind works and is playful, although probably at about 90%. And my emotions are simpler, less guarded, and in every way, I am more honest. I need to urinate badly. I need to hydrate worse, as I have been unable to do so while sleeping. I inhale cigarettes a bit too much. The effects last for another 24 to 48 hours, decreasing very slowly. 48 hours in. The next day is even more relaxed, and furthermore, the bulk of the unpleasant effects are gone. I can basically go to work and be responsible. The OD. This happened 4 days ago, June 11th, 2007. I live in a camp in California. It's a sort of work program for troubled youths, and in my case, comes with a bed, a closet for personal belongings, and food. Our camp is a 2-hour walk away from any civilization, so the night before, on the 10th of June, I walked for about 8 hours back and forth between camp and town. During the last such trip, I bought the usual 60-gram container from a local grocery store. I'd done their stuff only twice before, and it was strong. The first dose after a month's break is always strong. The second dose is much easier. I was dosing in the dark outside of camp, since I didn't want to explain all this to my roommates and get fired later when I get snitched out. So in the dark, I keep pouring the stuff into the cap that comes with the bottle and dosing off that. Typically 4 full caps will do it. Unfortunately, the nutmeg was bunched together, and I consumed more than I banked for, like an idiot. I didn't really pay attention to how much I was putting in there either. I was in a rush because it was late at night, and I wanted to wake up early and go to town the next morning to catch the internet at the library on my laptop. I drink about half a gallon of cold water before I go to sleep. I've been taking caffeine pills and smoking cigarettes all day. I did not properly hydrate. The next morning, I am woken up at 5:30 by a fire alarm, and am forced to march out of the bed to the assigned area where we are to meet and line up. As I get up, I realize that I am in no condition to walk and am real dizzy. My skin is yellowish and horribly pale, by the descriptions of my friends. I arrive at the location where we are to line up. I can barely stand. I feel my blood pressure dropping. I'm ridiculously high. I crouch down to get more blood into my head. As I get up from the crouch, I suddenly feel faint and pass out. My friends tell me I acted like I was having a seizure, falling and getting up, being incoherent and unable to answer questions, grabbing onto people to keep balanced. I have completely blacked out, and only to come to as 2 people drag me out of the group area towards the office parking lot where the ambulance is to come. As my consciousness resurfaces, my high resurfaces as well. I comment on how much better I'm feeling and tell them to let me go to sleep and how I would feel better, etc., but they keep dragging me to the bench where I'm supposed to sit and wait for the ambulance. I've hit my head repeatedly against the concrete. The one guy seemed confused and unsure as to what is happening with me, and the other dude is telling him that he thinks he knows what's wrong with me and shakes his head. He thinks I've had way too much to drink, and in his mind, thinks that this is my last day at the job. I'm thinking about keeping conscious, panicking about the cost of the ambulance, exulting God through the intense high, which reminds me of him, and laughing inwardly, thinking that the hospital will never detect the nutmeg in my system. I am strapped down to a bed, and my neck is put in a brace, the assumption being that something might have happened to my head and neck. No one seems to suspect that I'm under the influence of anything. I don't tell them anything. They don't ask. They just ask me how I am feeling, and I tell them that I'm faint and dehydrated and that I think my blood pressure dropped. They agree and are happy that there is no concussion or damage to the head. I am too. On the way to the hospital, they put me on an IV, and the bumpy road makes them stab my hand many more times than necessary. When I get to the hospital, I can't help but grin at the nurse who was putting sticky pads on my chest and hips for the EKG that they were about to do. They put me on a saline drip and monitor my heart. A nice old lady helps me with food and water, and I gladly consume 2 glasses of water with a delicious sandwich. I think to myself that this trip to the hospital is like a nice vacation from the ordinary. I'm still way too stoned to be worried about anything. I come out 2 hours later and am largely rehydrated, get back to camp, and go to sleep for the rest of the day. The next day, I sign some paperwork that makes the whole thing covered by workers' compensation, simply by virtue of it having happened on camp. My urine test reveals no drugs. Today, I rethink the whole thing and regret it. I'm getting more tests to check if I might not be prone to seizures.
Thought I was dying. 900 milligrams. This trip report took place on the day my cousin was celebrating his birthday party, which was on 420. It started off like any other day, but I had to go to my cousin's house to hang out with him for his birthday. Nothing eventful took place until after the party was over. At around maybe 8 p.m., after everyone was long gone from the party, me and my cousin, we will call Jerry, decided to walk to our friend Tyler's house to see if he wanted to hang out at the pier by the lake, and he agreed. After me and Jerry and Tyler went back to Tyler's house, he was looking in his dad's cabinet and found a package containing 3 450 milligram Robocoff bottles in it and gave it to us for free. So me and Jerry went back to the pier. I had a close inspection on these bottles to make sure the only active ingredient was DXM, and it was. So I read online about dosages and decided to give Jerry one bottle, 450 milligrams, and I will take two, 900 milligrams, which was a bad idea to start with because I was short and did not weigh much at the time, and my cousin weighed much more than me. If you don't know, Robocoff comes in a 5-hour energy type bottle, so me and Jerry downed them pretty fast, and then walked up to his house for my mom and dad to take us home. During the car ride home, I wasn't feeling the effects or nausea, but Jerry was complaining of having motion sickness. After we had gone home, a family friend had come over with her boyfriend and 2 daughters. Me and Jerry went into my room, and I started feeling the effects very quickly. I became very dizzy and had no motor skills at all, and neither did Jerry. I had decided I was too messed up and needed to go to sleep, so I took 3 melatonin and laid on the floor. Every time I closed my eyes, I was in pure bliss, and it felt as if I was a part of the floor. I didn't want to get up, but now I was beginning to see something when my eyes were closed. While I was lying on the floor, I could feel it moving under me, almost like a treadmill track, and in my head, I was seeing the bottom of a car driving on a road. My dad comes in the room saying something, but I couldn't remember what, and then Jerry says, "Watch out," and pukes on my dad's feet and stands up to go to the bathroom, but slams into the wall and collapses to the floor and starts throwing up face down onto my jacket as my mother comes. My dad is yelling at Jerry, and I desperately try to help the situation by repeating that "I'll clean it. It's okay. Don't worry about it." And my dad was pretty mad. Later, as I'm laying in the floor, Jerry says he is going to apologize to my parents and say we are drunk. I beg him to stop, but he doesn't listen. My mom comes in the room after Jerry comes back and tells us to eat bread because it'll absorb the alcohol and gives us 2 pieces. Jerry tells me to eat mine, but I won't, as I wasn't hungry. So he throws it on my face, and it sunk into my face, I thought, and I couldn't feel it anymore. As I try to close the door, Jerry tells me to keep it open. I ask him why, and he says because he gets mad when it's closed and will swing on me if I do not open it. And for some reason, I nearly burst into tears as I tell him I'm so sorry, please don't. Jerry then tells me, "You didn't tell me it would get us this fucked up," with a grin. The family friend's kids decided to mess with us and start knocking on the door and open it as they laugh demonically and echoey and run away. Jerry then starts saying he is getting angry and wants to swing on someone and tells my mom as she checks in on us. I sit up and tell Jerry I'm going to die, and he says I'm going to be okay, and I tell him we are overdosing, we are both dying right now, and he doesn't believe me. I then stand up after about 5 minutes. I run to the bathroom as quick as I can and puke blood red liquid, and the family friend comes in and asks me what I took and admitted it to her and told her not to tell, but she does anyways. Then everyone comes in to check on me, and I beg them to check on Jerry in my room. He was okay, but he was on a video call. Jerry comes into the bathroom where I have a blanket, and I am laying in the floor, and he hangs out with me. This made me feel better. But then my dad comes in and starts reading news reports about people dying while on DXM. That freaks out me and Jerry. Jerry cooks a chicken nuggets and fries microwave meal and offers me a chicken nugget, but as I bit into it, it felt as if it was completely dry and tasted so bland but terrible at the same time. And I instantly spit it into the toilet and start gagging and throw up. My heart is racing at this point. It felt like I was going to have a heart attack, and I keep twitching very badly. My mom comes in, and me and Jerry cry out that we are sorry and we fucked up over and over, and she understood. And I kept begging her for a hug to make me feel better, but she won't. After I'm done throwing up in the bathroom, like an hour later maybe, me and Jerry army crawl into the living room where everyone is and exclaim to the family friend's boyfriend not to do it. It's terrible. My dad says we must stay awake until it is completely worn off, and we will talk about it in the morning. I end up falling asleep around 2 because I was so tired, but I woke up in the middle of the night and everyone was asleep, and I was happy to be alive. I saw what looked like the stars in the sky on a time lapse all on my wall and ceiling of the living room. Overall, I would not recommend high doses of DXM. I do not regret doing it because I learned a lesson to never do DXM again after this.
TIFU by overdosing on 1.8 grams of diphenhydramine. This happened 3 days ago. I'm aware that there are many other reports about the same mistake. You may call me an idiot for not knowing better, and you would be absolutely right. First, some backstory. It was a combination of boredom, dissatisfaction with life, and an ever so growing curiosity towards the unknown. I wanted to break through from this reality, forget everything, and be immersed in a completely strange world. The strange aspect of diphenhydramine is its nonlinear nature of effects. The psychedelic properties can be felt even at low doses, but decrease with increasing dosage as the negative effects, particularly the dry throat and the sense of impending doom, overtake them. However, at a high enough dose, typically referred to as the breakthrough dose, or the 700 club, the negative effects essentially dissipate and one is left in a state of delirium where it becomes impossible to discern reality and imagination. As I began to dive deeper and deeper into these high doses, I deluded myself that I must continue to increase my dose to keep experiencing these states of psychosis without letting my body fully rest and reset my tolerance. And so, my intoxicated mind decided that ingesting 1800 milligrams or 72 pills would be a good idea the very next day after tripping on 1200 milligrams. I put on some music and waited for the effects to kick in. It only took 2 hours until I started to regret everything. The sense of impending doom was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. My throat felt like it was on fire, and sipping water relieved it for only a few seconds. My chest started tightening, as well as my back, left arm, and my neck. My entire body was constantly shaking, and I was profusely sweating through my hands and feet. The only thing I could think of was pain, pain, pain. I felt very nauseous, yet could not bring myself to throw up for the fear of waking my roommates and making them see how fucked up I was. I spent the next 6 hours in agonizing pain, trying my best to deep breathe and taking a walk of shame to the bathroom every 10 minutes. Urinary retention made it nearly impossible to urinate, but was relieved when sitting on the toilet made it work. The stimulating effect of diphenhydramine at such a staggering dose, combined with an already staggering tolerance, made it impossible to drift into delirium as I was constantly brought back to the reality of my suffering. I've never overdosed on caffeine, but I would imagine it would be similar to this experience. I managed to fall asleep around 3 a.m. and proceeded to have vivid dreams all night, some of which I still remember clearly. In my dreams, I was shown countless flashbacks of my childhood, including past traumas, which I subconsciously embedded in the deepest parts of my memory. I woke up the next morning with a horrible headache, fatigue, and a numbing soreness around my chest, back, and left arm. Apparently, I've slept on my left side all night, which was a bad idea since it put unnecessary strain on my heart and surrounding blood vessels, limiting the blood flow to the area. I've lost the sensation to touch in that area, and still hurts when I rub it. Although I felt absolutely terrible physically, emotionally, I felt calm and happy that I'm still alive and that I've made through it. This was also when I noticed the external hallucinations for the first time, seeing shadow figures walking all around my vision. I spent the day resting, eating pasta, and doing simple tasks like cleaning my room. It's 3 days later, and I finally got my full appetite back. I'm still recovering physically, but I'm really glad that I made it through intact, mentally and emotionally. I've used this experience to work on myself, set my goals straight, and promise myself to try my hardest staying sober, at least during this semester. Thanks for reading, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Too long, didn't read? Tripped on 1800 milligrams of DPH. Ended up not tripping at all, almost died.